So I'm going to be talking about the status of salmon and trout in 2023. I just want to acknowledge my contributors to the presentation: Mike Ewell and Tom Gristy from OMNR, Scott Prindle and Dan Bishop from DEC, Jeremy Holden from OMNR, and then Brian Waddell from USGS. I'm just going to talk about, first of all, just a quick review of the fish community objectives for the offshore pelagic in terms of predators, provide status updates on those predators, and then talk about a recent charge by the LOC to develop a salmonid index, and we've been working on it for about 3 years. We're starting to get our act together, so I thought I'd at least give an update on where we stand with that. So, fish community objectives for the offshore pelagic are basically maintain fisheries of all of our top predators: Chinook salmon, Atlantic salmon, coho, steelhead, brown trout. And we assess those mainly through our creel surveys. We also have a predator-prey balance indicator, which is the growth and condition of Chinook at age 3, and I'll provide an update on that and where that stands. Start with Chinook, top predator in the lake, and very important to our fishery. Chinook salmon catch rates in the lake have been monitored since 1985 in both U.S. and Canadian waters. The orange is from Ontario, from their creel survey, which was conducted every year until in the 2000s, and then it started to become less frequently done. We've done our survey since 1985 for the last 40 years annually, in the blue line there. And what you can see is that the catch rates in around 2003 jumped up, and then again in 2016 or so jumped up again to record high catch rates in 2018. Dropped for 1 year or so, and then climbed again in 2023. They were third highest in the time series, about 32% above the 10-year average. Ontario did not conduct a survey in 2022, but I provide those data just for context, and I'll continue to do that throughout the presentation. This is Chinook age structure from 91 to 2023 using New York data from the offshore or from the harvest. In 2023, the harvest was dominated mainly by age 2 Chinook salmon. Typically in Lake Ontario, we see fish as old as age 4. We have detected one age 5 over the years, and that was validated by codewire tags, but mainly age 1, 2s, and 3s. And in 2023, they were dominated by age 2 fish. If we just sort of apportion that harvested age and then standardize it per 50,000 boat trips by year class, it provides sort of an index of year class strength over the years. And what you see there is it has increased over time. Starting around the late 2000s, it seems like it's reached a new stanza. And that may be related to some of our stocking practices. It also is probably related to increased natural reproduction of Chinook salmon. We've done some studies in the past using marking trawler, and 30 to 70% of our fish, Chinook salmon, are wild fish. So, and when you look at, say, for example, the 2016 year class, the one highlighted in red there, it was our strongest year class. If you look at 2021 year class, which were the age 2s we saw in 2023, it looks like that year class is shaping up to be every bit as good as the 2016 year class. So it's going to be interesting to see in 2024 what the catch rates are like in the population. But right now it seems like abundance is high. If you look at that 2022 year class with just that one age 1 bar on the very end, it looks like that is also a relatively good strong year class. So together they may support a decent fishery next year. That's my prediction. Don't tell anybody. Total fish passed at Ganaraska Fishway. So since 2017, the MNRF has been monitoring fish that go through the Ganaraska Fishway using a video system and imaging system. These are just the cumulative returns through the fishway since 2017. The black line there on top indicates is from 2023, and it was a record high. Over 37,000 fish were passed through the fishway. 89% of those fish were Chinook salmon, happening from September through October. And if we look at the age structure of those fish as well, again, dominated by age 1 and age 2. And if you look at that age 1, if you look at the age 1 of that were sampled in 2023, again, it looks like relative to all the other age 1s that they've seen in previous years, it looks like that year class is strong. So it just corresponds with what we see in the lake, dominated by age 1s, and it seems like we have a pretty good strong year class from the 22 coming on as well. When you look at, we also have a creel survey in our Lake Ontario tributaries where the survey has been conducted periodically since 2005. Salmon rivers are really our main and most important in terms of catch and effort. So that's separated out in orange and blue are the average of our other tributaries. And we don't really see a big change in the last few years. It's like we did see it at Ganaraska. But overall, I'd say they're pretty stable. So moving on to Atlantic salmon. Mike talked about this mostly, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But, as Mike mentioned, we have implemented a new plan. We are seeing returns, but over the last 10 years or so, we have seen better returns in our fisheries. Catch rates, just notice that the catch rates are about an order of magnitude less than, say, something like a Chinook salmon. So it's still very low, but anglers are encountering these fish more frequently and they're really enjoying them, and I'd say that's an awesome fish right there. So I'd be happy to catch it, and I think they are too. 2023, catch rates were above average. Atlantic salmon adult returns are also monitored in tributaries. Mike already showed this, but in 2023, about 40 fish went through the. So again, low returns, but we're getting there. And Mike also talked about adult salmon returns to tributaries, and so I won't spend too much time on that. But again, it seems like at the places where we stock these fish, they are returning, not quite to the target levels, except at Sandy Creek in 2023. But I think we're making progress on these fish by changing some of our stocking practices and in the future working on some other things like habitat and finding the right strain. So we also monitor to evaluate our FCO, maintain predator-prey balance. We monitor the growth and condition of Chinook salmon every year at age 3 in August. We've done that since '91. And in 2023, it was about 18.8 pounds, about 2.8 pounds below average. Weight dropped by 2 pounds from 2022, and it's still about 0.4 pounds above the 2007 low, which is sort of our benchmark indicator. We want to keep our weights of age 3 fish above that level, and we've met that objective. We also keep track of weights in tournaments, and believe it or not, if you guys remember Bob O'Gorman, he still provides these data to us annually, so we appreciate that. He tracks that and provides these usually in the spring and the fall. This is from our Lake Ontario LOC, what they call the LOC Derby. In New York, we also have data from the 2 major tournaments in Canada, and they both on the U.S. side and on the Ontario side, you see a decline in Chinook size over the years. There's still large fish out there. They're just not as big as they were 10 years ago, and we hear that a lot from anglers, and they kind of wonder why, because you also often hear that there's plenty of aloe out there, so they're trying to reconcile the different of what they're observing in terms of aloe and what we're observing and measuring and what they're measuring in their tournaments in terms of size. And we often have to just remind them that it's not only about how many aloe are out there, but also the predators. And if you believe that the creel catch rates indicate anything about abundance, I think our predator abundance is quite high right now, and the ratio between those two is what really matters and determines what growth is of our main predator like Chinook salmon. Moving on to steelhead catch rates in Lake Ontario. Steelhead were lower, say 20 years ago, and starting in 2009, they jumped up in the New York survey and in both the New York and Ontario surveys. They were high for about 5 or 6 years through about 2009 through 2013, and then dropped. Since then, they've been at a lower level. In 2023 in New York, they dropped below the 10-year average. But, half a fish per trip for steelhead isn't bad. The other thing that might be happening is when Chinook fishing is really good, the anglers target steelhead less, so they don't go offshore and target those steelhead, so that might also be affecting the catch rates we're observing. Steelhead at the Ganaraska Fishway, however, is monitored and has been monitored for decades, and we also saw lower levels in 2023 compared to, say, 10 years ago, so at least our surveys are lining up. At the Salmon River, we've had, as I said before, we've conducted the creel survey periodically since 2005. Levels were higher 10 years ago at the Salmon River, and they're lower now, but they're still pretty decent, and they've been stable for, I'd say, for the last 5 or 6 years, based on the data. Brown trout in New York, it's the second most caught species. It represents a great, contributes to a great spring fishery. That's where anglers really target brown trout. And the catch rates there in New York in 2023 were about 8% above average. So catch rates are pretty good. In Ontario, there's less of a targeted fishery there, so the catch rates are much lower, but they've been stable over the length of the survey. Excuse me. Coho, again, it's a smaller component. We don't stock that many coho every year, but they also contribute to the diversity of our salmon and trout in the lake. They provide a unique fishery, especially in the springtime in the west end, and they also contribute to catch rates in the east end where the Salmon River is as they move back into the Salmon River. So they're also an important species. We track them as well. That's a awesome coho right there, caught this year off one of our charter captain's boats. Catch rates have been higher in the last 10 years, and they're about average in 2023. Okay, so I have time left. Good. The experimental midwater trawling, I just want to talk about this. The LOC is, recognizes the contribution of naturally reproduced Chinook salmon, as I talked about before. This is an index of seining in the Salmon River, and it shows the mean peak catch of Chinook salmon par in the river that's conducted every year for the last 20 years. And what you can see is quite variable, with some really strong production and some very low production. And as I said, and as I mentioned before, there seems to be two different stanzas, one in the early 2000s and then the last 20 years or 15 years or so, that production is at a higher level. When you compare that with the year class graph that I showed before, there's years where you see high production in the river, and those seem to stand out as strong year classes in the lake. So there's some signal there that natural reproduction are not only contributing, being produced, but also contributing to these strong year classes and the dynamics we're seeing in the population. Some years we see low year classes and also low production in that same year class in the river. And then in some years we're seeing that they don't line up. So, of course it's variable, it's noisy, but just because they're produced in the river doesn't mean they survive every year the same way in the lake. And we understand that the bottleneck is likely occurring once they get to the lake or on their way to the lake and in their first year of life. So the Lake Ontario Committee has recently charged the Predator Prey Group with developing an early index of year class strength, or at least evaluating whether that's something we can do. And we started in 2021. Ontario was the first out of the gate. They did some Jeremy Holden and the Ontario Explorer did some trawling on the North Shore, and he managed to identify where the habitat was. They did midwater trawling, but mostly near bottom. It seemed to be that these Chinook were concentrated around the interface of the bottom with the thermocline. The lower graph there just shows the red dots show where Chinook were not caught. Blue dots show where Chinook were. So at least we were successful. I think they caught around 15 fish. Sorry about that. My thing advanced by itself. There's a lot on this chart, so I'm not going to really get into it too much. But essentially, what it shows is that the bottom depth is on the lower axis, foot rope depth is on the upper axis. The diagonal is essentially representing bottom. The yellow band is representing where the thermocline was, and the circles represent the catches of each of the different species, the total number. The red circles are depths or habitats where we did not catch those species, but we conducted a trawl. And I just want to point out a few things. On the right there is what we saw in 2022 off Seth Green, and we focused on those same habitats where Ontario Explorer were able to catch fish, but we didn't really catch many Chinook. First night we went out, banged a couple down, and we said, all right, we got them. The next 2 nights we didn't. So in 2023, we want to take a different approach, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the other take-home message that I want to point out is, if you look at those bands, those yellow bands representing the 10 degree to 20 C mark, even from night to night or from location to location, that thermocline changes a lot. This is just in 3 successive nights. And then I think that's really important for explaining the distribution of these fishes. So just keep that in mind. So in 2023, we put all 3 vessels, USGS, New York DEC, and Ontario Explorer, put 3 vessels on the water. We put about 1 week each into it. Focused mainly again in the near shore, because based on some studies, even Jim Johnson did years ago, both Jim Johnsons, but one in Ontario and one in Huron, show that these fish are occupying the near shore in their first few months of life. By fall, we know that the fish reach about 10 inches, and we think they got over that first hurdle, the first bottleneck. So we focused on those, that area, and then we focused near bottom with where the intersection of the thermocline is, where the bottom is. Well, we sampled lots of different habitats. We conducted about a total of 140 tows, caught about 18 species, and we compared bottom trawling versus midwater trawling just above bottom, and what we found is that the bottom trawls produced about 4 times the number of Chinook salmon that our midwater trawls did. So it informed us a lot. We learned a lot this year, just in terms of where the Chinook young of the year habitat is, and we're going to use this information going forward to try to design a program that can capture these fish in greater numbers. One thing to keep in mind, though, is when we did the bottom trawling, we have established transects where we know that the bottom is okay to trawl on. And when you're midwater trawling, you can run all along the lake and hit places where you haven't trawled before. So if we're moving forward with this, and because of that changing thermocline interaction that I talked about before, we need to establish new trawling sites over ground that's tested to be able to really get enough samples in the future. So with that, if I have any time, I will take questions.